An international conference of countries which have influence on events in Syria is scheduled for this coming Saturday in Geneva. It aims to try to find a solution to the crisis, and Iran has not been invited, though, despite earlier statements from the UN Syria envoy Kofi Annan that it should be part of the peace process. Well, let's discuss this with Sarah Marasek, researcher from the Syracuse University in Beirut. Why, Sarah, do you think Tehran hasn't been invited to this Geneva conference?
Well, of course, Tehran has not been invited because of the firm U.S. position that Iran be excluded from any talks when it comes to Syria. The Secretary of State made it very clear that basically because Iran supports Assad, they should be excluded from any talks, which is an absolutely absurd position to take because Washington actually supports regime change. So by that, you know, the country's own logic, it should actually be excluded from any talks on what the situation in Syria is. So really, this is Washington's heavy hand coming down again on international affairs, and particularly in this region. And, you know, as Russia has stated, this conference coming together really will have not much impact if it excludes Iran. And it is very unfortunate that unfortunately, Kofi Annan, who also, like you said, insists that Iran should be included, has caved into U.S. will on this and has excluded Iran from the upcoming event.
Well, the aim of this meeting is to support the Annan peace plan and back a Syrian-led political transition. Just how realistic is political transition when now, as Assad said, there is a war going on in his country?
Well, of course, as well, we don't know what a political transition means. Assad has already undertaken a political transition. He's undergone several reforms. There's a new cabinet. There are some new ministers. There's a new parliament. And so basically there are changes happening in Syria. And these are political transformations. These are the reforms that are required in places like Yemen for a successful cessation of hostilities. But according to Washington and its European allies, and as well as its Gulf allies, the only choice is regime change, and so for them, they will not stop at anything less. So with these different realities on the ground of what a political transformation means, it's very unlikely that the Annan plan will get off the ground. It never really did. It was never given a chance by the Western countries. If the Western countries had believed in it like they paid lip service to, they would have actually put pressure on the rebels to stop fighting, to not violate the ceasefire and not commit the atrocities that they've been committing over the last several months. According to Kofi Annan, basically the hostilities right now, the attacks and the casualties are as high as they were before the ceasefire, which shows that the Western countries never took it any seriously, and they never put any pressure on their opposition.
Just briefly, Russia and China, of course, against any form of external regime change. They're going to be at that meeting. So what hopes do you have? Anything coming out of that Geneva conference at all?
There are really very little hopes right now unless the Western really engages in a serious dialogue with the Syrian government and with its allies in the region, including Iran, as well as Lebanon, as well as Iraq. All these countries in the region that have populations that will be impacted by what's going on in Syria need to be involved. And really, right now, if there's a meeting excluding Syria's allies, how is Syria going to be engaged with it all? That's just, it's going to be the same sort of finger-wagging threat of war, threats of regime change, threats of everything coming from the West without any real change happening on the ground in Syria. And Syrians continue to suffer because of this.
Let me just ask you for your reaction on the latest development concerning that TV channel being attacked. The rebel forces say they haven't attacked any media at all. So who else actually would benefit from a strike on a pro-regime news station then? Just briefly, your thoughts on that.
Oh, of course, this has to really benefit the rebels. I mean, I cannot say if they've done it or not, but this is definitely in their interests. And really, it's quite ironic that this station gets targeted right after the EU places sanctions on the station. And so really, you know, sanctioning these different media outlets, and the U.S. actually sanctioned Syrian state television, it almost gives a legitimation for the rebels to attack these places and to commit these atrocious terrorist attacks against innocent people just trying to get a message out. And if they support the regime, that's their political decision. That's their right to support the regime. They should not be targeted for this. And it's just really quite atrocious that this has happened. And of course, we won't see the Western outcry that we see when Western journalists get caught in the crossfire. And this was an intentional attack, terrorist attack against an institution.
Sarah, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts on this. Sarah Marasek, researcher from Syracuse University in Beirut, joining us live there. Thanks for being with us here on RT.